Welcome to the Pieces of Systematic Review with Margaret Foster, Session 6. This is the last session of our originally scheduled topics, though we will have one final session for wrap-up and Q&A, and we'll tell you all a little bit more about that later. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. It is my pleasure once again to introduce the wonderful Margaret Foster, who is Associate Professor at Texas A&M University, as well as Systematic Reviews Coordinator at the Medical Sciences Library with a joint position at the School of Public Health and the College of Medicine of the Texas A&M University Health Sciences Center. Margaret has a really wonderful session planned for you all today with plenty of wonderful pictures. So I'll go ahead and switch over to her slides, and then I will hand over control to her. Good morning, Margaret. I believe you need to unmute yourself and we can get started.
Hello.
Hi, Margaret.
Hi. I think I clicked on it one too many times.
No worries. So you'll want to switch back over to your slides as well.
Okay, so I can see my slides.
All right, go ahead and click on the tab one more time with your slides in them, Margaret.
Oh, I can see them. I'm not sure what's happening.
Okay, let me take back the ball from you, and then I will see if I can get them switched over. There we go. That should be switched over, and now I'll go ahead and give it back to you. And you can go ahead, Margaret.
Okay, so good morning. Today we're going to be talking about the new developments in systematic reviews. And just as a quick overview, these are the 6 questions that we've been answering with this series. And we started off by looking at how do you determine if a research question is right for the review. We talked about searches beyond the typical databases, what do you do after the search, free software, and some of the other types of reviews. And so I thought we would end up by looking more to the future of what's happening in development of the methods. So we're going to look at some new developments. I'd like to talk a little bit about some options if you were interested in doing some research or participating with others in research on methods and the best ways to keep up with what's happening in systematic reviews. So the methods of systematic reviews, I've said this a few times, it's not set in stone. There's always new things happening, new standards coming out. And one area where there's a lot of growth right now is in applying these methods to many other questions and many other disciplines. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. So I have a few pictures in here. In the last 7 weeks, I've been to 3 conferences. And these are a few pictures from my visit to MLA in Seattle. So I was there for a week. I was very proud of myself. I decided to ride the train from the airport to my hotel, which was only supposed to be 3 blocks away from the train stop. But when I got there, I was met with a very unexpected situation where my walk was only 3 blocks, but it was 3 blocks straight up. So I don't know if anybody else visited Seattle, but I was not expecting that. There was some very interesting artwork right outside the room where I was giving a systematic review workshop, and I kind of took a picture there. That's an eyeball kind of on that middle statue, so it was very weird. And it turned out that cheaper is not always better. My room had no curtains, so usually around 5:30, 6 a.m. I was awake. So I was very shocked by that. Eventually they did get me curtains. Unfortunately, it was the day I was leaving. So, and then after that, I went to Hill, which was held in Dublin, at the Dublin Castle here. And This is a great workshop. It's amazing how many people from so many different countries come to it, and I know we get a lot of international visitors to MLA, but it's really different when you're the international visitor, so I really enjoy my visit there. One thing that was really exciting that I got to do there was to go and visit the Long Library, which is part of Trinity College. And it's really interesting that when they decided to do the Jedi Archives in Star Wars, they took it from this idea. So I think we can always look towards the future, but it's really good to know where you came from as well. And so later you might want to come back and read about the Long Library, and it's really an amazing place. And then progress is messy. So my coworker had a wonderful view outside her window at her hotel onto this beautiful church with a little garden. My view is a little bit different. That is a toy from my son. I later found that he packed in my bag for me along with some candy. He's 4. And so I couldn't have my window open most days because there was so much drilling. They were actually breaking through to the ground, underground, because they were extending their subway system. And then lastly, I ended up in Columbus, Ohio at the American Society for Engineering Education. And again, I have no curtains. I'm very curious as to if this is becoming a common situation. I did have blinds, but just not any curtains to actually block out the light. And I saw a lot of construction there. And it was just a reminder that progress can be sometimes painful. There were a lot of places I wanted to go, but it was difficult getting there as a pedestrian because of all the construction there. In thinking about the future, it's important to look back on the past, to build on it, and to continuously assess. And by going to EAHIL and MLA and even the engineering conference, I got to see how many different people from different disciplines, different professions are taking the idea of systematic reviews and trying to apply it to their needs and what's happening there. So I'll talk to you about a few trends that I was seeing. One is there's a lot of research going into further refining the methods, on the processes, things like that. There's the idea of living systematic reviews, text mining, and crowdsourcing. So in thinking about refining the methods, there's been a few study types out there that really haven't gotten as much attention as systematic reviews have, that are starting to become more important. One of those is the realist review, which we touched on a little bit last time. And there are now standards published for those, and I would look to see those to start to become even more important as we go forward. Realist reviews are those that focus on how something works and who does it work for. So it's the idea of not just does this intervention work, but will it work with my population, and how can I adjust it, things like that. So now there are standards which make things easier to point to and to actually get these done. Joanna Briggs now has guidelines for scoping reviews and for umbrella reviews. Scoping reviews in the last 3 or 4 years have become more and more popular and continue to grow. Umbrella reviews are systematic reviews of systematic reviews. And we're starting to see, at first there was a lot of variety, people trying all different ways of putting together systematic reviews, and now we're starting to see standards on this is how you should do them. And there's also a lot of research in trying to figure out what topics actually need a systematic review. As we all know, systematic reviews take a lot of time, which of course means money, and trying to decide what a group should focus on can sometimes be very daunting. And that's actually where the idea of scoping reviews came from, was to help to figure out where those priorities should be, what was most important, and so now we're starting to see some guidance on that. So what is a living systematic review? Well, first, there are some issues. 50% of reviews they have found take 2 years to go from a protocol to a published review. And those are the ones that actually submitted protocols. I would probably guess that those that don't submit a protocol, probably their average is even longer. And then within 5 years of publication, about 50% of the reviews, they're no longer current, not just because they don't have the last 5 years in them, but because those last 5 years would actually change the results as well. So there's been some work on trying to figure out how can we improve this. So we have a question here. What's the difference between umbrella reviews and meta reviews? So sometimes when they say a meta review, that's a meta-analysis of meta-analysis. But you know, sometimes people also toss these words around, and so I'd have to look at exactly what they did to figure out what they mean by that. Right now there's so many different terms and so many different words that I don't always trust that they mean what they're calling things, especially when they invent new terms. So a scoping review, I'll just kind of briefly summarize that. So a scoping review is where you want to figure out, you have this broader question than a systematic review. So a systematic review is a very narrow question where there's a set of studies that can answer your question. In a scoping review, you're not sure which set of questions you should focus on. So, so you search through a broader set of studies, and you kind of show people these different sets of studies that are out there. Sometimes they're used to show a gap in the research, although I learned at EAHIL that maybe that wasn't the best purpose of a scoping review. And sometimes people confuse mapping reviews and scoping reviews, and I definitely was doing that before. So a mapping review is where you're trying to, you say, okay, I want to look at this area of research, and you're going to make a map. It's kind of like you already know where the boundaries are, and now you want to show somebody else the lay of the land. Okay, so you might say, oh, there's been this many studies, they've covered these populations, they've used these methods, they've answered these questions, really just touching on each item very lightly. In fact, you might even refer to a mapping review as a bibliometric analysis, perhaps. A scoping review is where you don't know where the edge of the map should be, and so you're trying to figure out what the scope is. There's a very fine line between them, and I'm still struggling myself at seeing that line. Andrew Booth is his book, which I've listed a couple of times on this page. He gets into this a little bit, and when I took his workshop, which I got to take at EAHIL just a few weeks ago, he talked about those differences, but it's not easy. It's still fuzzy for me. I hope that answers your question, okay? The idea of a living systematic review can be applied to any review type, and it basically means that the review is going to be continuously updated. So you might think about Cochran reviews, as many of them are living reviews, and that they expect the authors to continuously update that review. I think they like to see them updated every 2 years. I might be wrong about that time. And basically, they want you to predefine how frequently new evidence is going to be sought out, screened, when it's going to be incorporated into the entire review process, meaning also into the results. And some thresholds about when you might stop working on that review or stop updating it. And basically all the other steps are the same. So when a group is trying to decide should they try and do a living systematic review, here's the things that are suggested to consider. Is that research question really a high priority in decision making? Is it something that we continuously need to know what is the best intervention? And is a lot of new research coming out in that area? And then do you have the capacity to continue those ongoing workflows? This would really have to be something that a group could commit to. So it might be probably is something that they are expert on and want to and need to know what the final determination is of that research question. Because, of course, this is going to take a great deal of time, as we've already said how long these take. And so living systematic reviews are related to many of the other developments in that the better we are able to take on that workload, the better that, and the more often these systematic reviews will be able to be updated. So it's going to be helped when there are better collaboration tools. We can do some text mining, which we're going to talk about in the next few slides. When data repositories are much easier to get to, the data is all linked. And also crowdsourcing. So we're going to talk about crowdsourcing and text mining next, because these are terms that people throw around a lot. And so we'll just talk about them a little bit and how they relate to systematic reviews. So the idea of text mining, it took me a while to kind of picture what does this mean. And so on one side here, I made this little, these two little boxes here. So one side we see the reds and the yellows and the greens kind of all mixed up. And so I made the greens in here. Those are the most relevant articles. Those are the ones we're looking for. Yellows are a little bit in between, and the reds are definitely, we don't need those. So the text mining idea here is basically is going to act as a magnet. And so you want to pull the different groups, especially the ones most relevant, up to the top. And so it's kind of also the idea of what Amazon, of course, does a little bit of this in what they suggest. Oh, people who bought this, they also bought that. But first, in order to train the computer about what you're looking for, you've got to screen sometimes 1 to 200, and sometimes I see they say, oh, 3 to 400. And once the computer is able to see the markers of what you're labeling, then you push this button and it kind of orders things by relevancy. And so James Thomas from the Epicenter in the UK, he's been writing a lot about this, and I borrowed his idea of the magnet, and I kind of created this image based on that, and he's been writing and researching and talking a great deal about this, as the Epicenter has some software to do this. One issue is that the software, it does take some, it takes some time to learn and set up the software. And so I think once that becomes a little bit less daunting for the average user, you'll start to see this used more often. So how will that fit into the process? I found this image from an article looking at how to make the screening process more efficient. And so here they show a couple of different ways that people have tried screening. So the first way is that title and abstract records are always screened by 2 independent authors. And of course, this is the standard. if you do this, this gets you high marks on all of the different checklists of was the systematic review done well. And so that's what you see here in the beginning. And then they show a few other ones where in one case there's just one person screening, and then in another way they each are screening independently, but they don't necessarily both do all of them. And then the last way is using some text mining, which is basically using the computer as your second screener. So in the research that they've seen, this is better for some topics than others. So when the topic is very clinical, usually the wording, the labeling, the indexing, the level of the detail that's in the abstracts is usually a lot easier to find than when we get into the more vague terms, more into the social science, more into public health. The ability of the text mining to work well starts to go away. I hope that over time we'll start to improve abstracts and things like that, but I think there's always going to be some topics where the concepts are still vague, or there's so many different ways of expressing that concept. And I think this is something that as librarians we face and know kind of intuitively based on what we've been doing, and sometimes we have to explain that to our users and why they're getting so many back to screen. So I hope this kind of helped demonstrate text mining here. So what is crowdsourcing? So basically crowdsourcing is the idea of using a crowd to do some work. And so in systematic reviews, this has been applied especially to screening. So you could do this in Rayon. We talked about the Rayon software a little bit. It's that free software for screening. And you could actually make a folder or a review in Rayon open to the public. And as long as you had preset your screening criteria there, you could have them do that. There's a new group that I just found recently called CrowdScreen SR. I'm still trying to investigate. I wasn't quite sure if it was free, although I think that it is. I didn't see anything trying to charge me money. But the idea that you could post this and have multiple people screening. And Cochran has done several projects where they're using some kind of crowdsourcing. I meant to add one more screen about some of their projects. But for example, they have a project where you can go and help screen through some Embase results and decide if it needs to be added to their register. And they are also going back through some of the Cochran systematic reviews and labeling them as in the PICO kind of format, so they're doing that. Oh, thank you, Robin. So I do have one question about what software am I referring to for text mining. So Rayon does some text mining. There's the EPI Reviewer. They have some text mining. One of the best ways you can go and explore, because there are many, many softwares out there for text mining, is you could go to the SR Toolbox. And I'll post that link here just a second. And they have a lot of different software out there. This area has really exploded lately in how many different types of software out there. And some are easier to use than other and more helpful than others, depending on your topic. So I just kind of wanted to introduce the idea here about what it is and what's happening. Most of the software that I've seen on it hasn't been quite user-friendly yet. And there's a difference between text analysis and text mining. So text analysis, you see a lot they use in qualitative reviews where they're trying to capture themes, how many times a word was said, that kind of idea. Text mining is a little bit different. So I hope that answers your question. Okay. Okay. So that was a few of the big trends that I've been seeing in systematic reviews. And next I was going to kind of switch gears and look at research that you could do into systematic review methods. But is there anyone that, any big trends that anybody else wants to mention? Okay, so rapid reviews, they've been around for a while, and we are starting to see people do them faster because of more technology and things. The most important thing with rapid reviews is to know whatever shortcuts you took to make that review more rapid can then decrease the quality of the systematic review. And so sometimes the term rapid review just means that you tried to do it really fast, and then sometimes people also mean that they cut corners. And so I think we're going to see some more standards come out to talk about what's the most important thing not to remember to do or to include. Critical reviews. Critical review doesn't really have a definition. That can mean all different kinds of things. So that's not one of those set terms yet. I have seen that come up in some titles and some PubMed results. And sometimes I would say it's leaning towards a systematic review. Sometimes they mean they're doing an appraisal, which should be included in all systematic reviews. Anything else? Okay. So that we kind of switch gears here and talk about some ways that you could participate in doing research on systematic review methods. So there you could create a search filter, which we'll talk more about in a minute. You could think about a piece of software or ways to improve some current software that's out there, better ways to document the different processes, and of course we usually think about the search itself. The quality of the searches, how can we improve those, and how can we improve retrieval? As I went to all of these different conferences, I saw how different researchers were approaching these ideas in all different ways, and it was really fascinating. I saw some ideas I definitely would love to be a part of or try out it with my own topics. There is so much work to be done here that it's really wide open, especially in some disciplines, because really nobody is writing about systematic reviews in the area, or very few researchers are. And so really research can improve, and you can think about how to improve any of the steps, from how do you determine which question to do, how do you manage the project itself, to the search, to the screening, and the appraisal part of it. We're seeing a lot of work come out about especially looking at complex interventions, so interventions with lots of components. We have all these nice appraisal lists of how do you appraise a randomized control trial or a case study, things like that. But there are some interventions that are really complex, so we definitely need some better guidance on how to look at those. In collecting and coding information, there are some people, researchers, who are focusing on how to get that data automatically out of articles. Of course, it helps when those articles have a really set standard of how they're written, but they're trying to automate that more. And then how should these, what should we do with the findings? How should those be shown? There's even been some research in the best ways to summarize systematic reviews for the public. for physicians and clinicians to understand these. So we're seeing work done in all of these different areas. So I had one question about what is a protocol? So a protocol is where you would publish or put somewhere, and for example, Cochran does these, where you publish exactly what you're going to do for your systematic review without publishing the whole systematic review first. And there's a few reasons for doing that. One is you let everybody know that you're working on this, so they might decide to focus on a different topic area. Two is that they can get some feedback on their question, on their search terms, on different parts of it. And there are some questions out there that are really great questions, but there's not any research, or there are very few studies done on it yet, so they can't really do a full-blown systematic review. So protocols get that out there. We see them much more in clinical medicine being required, and some journals require that if they're going to publish a systematic review, that protocol was registered through something like Prospero. In other disciplines, that idea isn't quite there. Another group that collects protocols is Joanna Briggs, the Campbell collaboration, which focuses on education, social welfare, that kind of idea. So we're starting to see a lot more groups collecting protocols than ever before. That was a really good question. So search filters have been called lots of different names. They've been called search hedges, filters, I'm trying to think of a few other ones. And PubMed has a lot of these that have been developed that when you click on limit to like therapy articles, or there's a veterinary search filter, that it's a set of terms that have been determined to be really useful in finding all the articles that match a certain method type, population. There's different ones have been developed. And you develop search filters whenever you're creating a search. But some of these have been validated, and then we use them over and over again. The one that's probably been used the most often is the randomized control trial filter, which Cochran uses. So whenever I need to get out all the randomized control trials from Medline, I'm always going to use the one that was developed for Medline. I never just use the little checkbox in Medline for randomized control trials. And so there are search filters out there for many of the different study types, and most of them have been designed for Medline and Embase. But there's a big need to have these designed for databases other than those two, especially when you get into CINAHL, PsycInfo, ERIC, databases getting away from clinical medicine and into these other areas, especially for those of us who do a lot of public health reviews. It would be really useful to have some. And then I see some groups, like there was a group in Spain, they created a search filter just for to find those studies published in Medline that were based in Spain. So geography filters are starting to pop up, age-related filters. And I think eventually we might start to see a few more subject area ones developed. I think those are a little harder to, maybe harder to validate. I think that would be interesting. I put up this article from Jenkins. It's a really nice overview of what does it take to create and to validate a search filter. When I was working on my thesis, I wanted to create a search filter. My committee discouraged me greatly and said that was more of a dissertation. They thought it would take too long. But I really enjoyed that article. It made things really clear. And I think some more work has gone into the methods of creating search filters, but it hasn't changed that much since this one came out. It was really well done. So in improving citation retrieval, there are so many issues that we're dealing with. the duplicates, oh my goodness. And there have been several papers, such as Weishore-Brommer recently published in JMLA about his method for deduping an EndNote. For Lubbock, yes, that was the hedge I was talking about. The deduping part is one of the most time consuming parts of this. The title of the article from JMLA. Oh, sure. I will be happy to do that. So his name is Weishore. Is his first name? I think I spelled his last name correctly. So he produced a series of JMLA articles. And I will put that up onto the slides, onto the site. I'll show you that at the end. So I'll have that on there for you. I'm going to write that down right now as well. So he's been doing a lot of work in focusing on the efficiency of retrieval. And so he's published a few articles. I think they're in the tools and tips area of JMLA. So he's had several published in the last couple of years. But we also need to think about how can the indexing be improved, and maybe even going back to the abstracts themselves. Because if the information was clear in the abstracts, the indexing could be done better, and it just kind of snowballs from there. And when I was thinking about retrieval, I was thinking about, do you train the dog better, or do you throw a better stick? So I think there's different ways that we can approach improving information retrieval. And what we saw in the beginning, when people were trying to find all the randomized control trials on a certain topic, and they were first noticing how difficult that was to do with Medline, and how the limiter in Medline for randomized control trials wasn't working very well. There were a group actually approached Medline, and I think this was a Cochran Methods group, to improve that limiter, and actually went back and relabeled, I think it was more than 100,000 randomized control trials so that they would be labeled correctly. There's some work being done about when can you stop searching, and they're approaching this in a few different ways. I know one researcher is looking at when you're doing a meta-analysis and you keep adding new studies in, if you add a new study and it doesn't change anything, about trying to determine when that is that you could stop collecting and you know that, okay, this is the right answer. And that's a tricky thing. I think it's still very controversial. So still working through all of that. But then there's other ways of figuring out when to stop searching as well. And what happens to the result of the systematic review when all the relevant studies are not found? So we've seen this research done, the publication bias. There's a lot of publication bias articles out there that first started letting us know that just searching Medline wasn't enough, that we needed to search the grade literature because they were finding there were big issues. And now there's been some kind of pushback on that, saying, well, it doesn't really make a difference. And then some groups have said, well, it makes a difference for some disciplines and not for others. So it's still very tricky. I think we still follow the best practice, follow the standards that are out there for Cochran, and we see what happens as they kind of come up with the best way to do. Okay. So some ways of keeping up with the new developments. So there are journals, websites, and there's the Systematic Review SIG from MLA. So I'll talk a little bit about these. So there are a few journals. There are two journals right now that focus specifically on systematic review methods. And one is just titled Systematic Reviews. It's from Biomed Central. And the other is the Research Synthesis Methods. And systematic reviews focuses mostly on, of course, systematic reviews, but I do talk a little bit about a few other types of reviews. Research synthesis methods can get a little bit further out as talking about lots of different types of methods there. And then I also see several articles coming out of the BMC Medical Research Methodology and PLOS Medicine. So those are four kind of journals that you could look at to see what are they publishing. And mostly I focus on the first two to see any new articles that are coming out. There are some websites that you can also look at to see what's happening. So there's Cochran Methods, which I'm going to show you a few slides from there so you can kind of see what they have there. There's PubMed Health, and I have a slide on that. And then there's the Systematic Review Toolbox, which I put in the link a little bit further up, that continues to add more types and examples of software on systematic reviews. And one of my favorite things is I go through the Twitter feed that they have going on there to see what are the latest tools that people are talking about. So usually I'll scroll down about the first 20 that I see on there every other week or so. And that's how I learned about Rayon. So a little bit about Cochran Methods. This is the front of their group. And you can see on here they have their MECOR update, and we talked a lot about the MECIR. Those are the methodological expectations of Cochrane intervention reviews or information retrieval. I think it's information retrieval, CIR. So we went through a lot of those, especially in session 2, where we were talking about databases, the gray list, all the different places that need to be searched and following those updated guidelines. So on their page, there's they have lots of different areas that you can look at. There's funding for researching different methods. There's lots of methods groups. And so if you click on methods groups, you'll see some of them. And they do have the methods groups for rapid reviews. So I know somebody was talking about rapid reviews. There's one for grading, and grading is how they look at the overall quality of the evidence. And then, of course, there's the methods group that focuses on information retrieval. And so I've got their page here. And of course, their main publication that they have out right now is the MECOR, but they also have a few other resources. For example, they have a list of databases relevant to low and middle income countries. So I know especially for my public health, the School of Public Health here, they would love to include research from around the world when they're doing their systematic reviews, or sometimes they're focusing on those countries. And I have to think a little bit outside the box for those. And so this list has helped me there. And then they also have some research related to finding unpublished studies. So you might look in here to see what's happening there, as well as they have their get involved areas. So if you're interested in research, that's another way you could go and see what's happening. PubMed Health is a new database from PubMed. It's been out for a couple of years now. And one feature that they have added, if you go under contents to the methods resources, you can see what they've added. And right now it's a pretty small collection of research articles. For the most part, these are just published online through them. And so all of these are free, full text available. And you can always send these to researchers. And so I think the next slide has one of these articles kind of spelled out here. Oh, no, I don't have that. So I've looked at a few of these One article is assessing a method to detect signals for when to update a systematic review. So they're looking at how to know when a systematic review must be updated. There's lots of research in here about determining risk of bias. So you might come in here from time to time and see what they're doing. Oh, and there's going to be a PubMed Health webinar coming up soon. And so I've gone to a few. It helps, I think, to see a few different talks about PubMed Health, and it took me a while to kind of wrap my head around exactly what they were trying to do. As to me, the name is kind of strange, that it's a collection of systematic reviews, but they decided to call it PubMed Health. I thought that was a little strange. Are there any other websites that any of you are using to keep up with methods and systematic reviews that I haven't mentioned? I think we also see a lot from the listservs and things like MLA's Expert Searcher, or if you belong to the IRMG listserv. So there are lots of different listservs that are also out there. I will list those on the Google site I created for this series. Just realized I didn't put those here. I'm going to add that. Oh, you were going to mention Expert Searcher list. Yeah, so I think, you know, with we're going to see a lot of things come up by talking with each other. And so my next slide is about the Systematic Review SIG. We have started a series of talks. Every month we do one called Tuesday Talks. And in Canada now they have the Knowledge Synthesis Interest Group. If you have a website or something, Robin, that you'd like to paste in there for anyone who is interested in joining your group, please feel free to post that in here. So through the Tuesday Talks, we do these, usually it's the third Tuesday of the month from 11 to noon Central Standard Time. We put up the call or advertise the talk that's coming up on our SIG WordPress site there. And then we usually try and do some kind of summary based on that. So our next one is going to be in a few weeks. Sarah Young is actually going to lead this one, and she's going to be we're going to be talking about all these different types and different review methods. And we're going to have some people who've done some of the different types come in and talk about what they've done. Oh, thank you, Robin. So everybody can see that there. And so all are welcome to join our Tuesday Talks. We have some really lively discussion, and there's usually some time in there for people to ask questions about other things as well. And if anyone has any ideas about a topic they'd like to see covered, you can always let us know. We're always looking for a new topic to cover in there. One thing we're thinking about doing is start taking a review question, putting it out there for everyone. Anybody who would like to do it can develop their own search and then submit those searches, and then we could come together as a group and look through the searches and talk about the differences. Yes, that is a little gerbil in there. And so anyone is welcome to join our Tuesday Talks. The link there is how to get onto our WebEx page. So that will be for July the 25th. So please join us. And for our next session, we are going to kind of wrap up our talk. And I'd also love to see any more questions that you have. And so this will be our last time to meet. So it'll be on August the 3rd. And what I'll do is the same thing I did for the last Q&A, where I kind of grouped questions together and go through those answers. Sarah, do you want to tell them how to submit their questions?
Sure, absolutely. So of course we have been collecting questions that you all have put in the chat box from every session. And then anytime you use that hashtag pieces QA on any type of social media, we're able to track those as well. If you're more comfortable just shooting us an email, that's totally fine as well. We'll make sure that Margaret gets all of the questions that we have been forwarded, and of course you are more than welcome to bring your questions to the session as well. All right, so if that's all for you, Margaret, I'll go ahead and take the slides back over and do a few final housekeeping things if people will just hang on a few more minutes to finish those up. Thank you, Margaret, for another wonderful session.
Oh, thank you, and I hope that I'm looking forward to your questions and putting all of this together, so thank you.
All right, thank you, Margaret. And we can't thank Margaret enough. Really, this is something we've had some really wonderful feedback from everyone about this series. We're indebted to Margaret for her knowledge and her insights, as well as her enthusiasm for sharing her knowledge. And we are really thankful for her willingness to do this series with us. I'm going to go ahead now and stop the recording before I do a few final housekeeping things.